The girl took off her dress and immediately dived into the water. Moments later, she emerged completely soaked. Sunlight filtered through the water droplets, outlining her graceful figure. And all of this was seen clearly by the servant in front of her. However, Cecilia showed no sign of embarrassment. She calmly tidied her clothes, took the items from the servant's hand, and quickly left the scene. At this moment, the ambiguous scene was keenly noticed by the girl's younger sister, standing at the window on the second floor. Although Briony didn't know exactly what the two were doing, an intense jealousy surged within her. The seed of revenge also began to sprout in her heart because she had long harbored feelings for Robbie. She even risked jumping into the lake to test whether Robbie liked her. When young Briony was lifted up by Robbie, she thought she had found love mutual and true. As a result, Briony's ignorance earned her Robbie's disgust. In the same water scene, Robbie's attitude toward his sister was different. Briony immediately felt jealous and even believed he was a hypocrite. However, the reality was completely different from Briony's expectations. Cecilia and Robbie were childhood sweethearts, but due to their difference in social status, she was a wealthy young lady. He was the son of a housekeeper. They rarely interacted publicly, and everyone thought they were merely master and servant. Their feelings had long been hidden, unnoticed, and no one had revealed the subtle barrier between them. However, as Robbie grew older, his feelings for Cecilia deepened, and he was unwilling to remain just a servant. Therefore, Robbie decided to go abroad to study medicine, to improve his social standing so he could legitimately pursue Cecilia. Since studying medicine would take at least 6 years, Robbie was very reluctant to leave Cecilia. But Cecilia, considering propriety, politely suggested Robbie follow his father's advice to stay in his current position, which was more appropriate and offered a stable income. This was a common suggestion, but Robbie, whose tuition was funded by Cecilia's father, mistakenly thought Cecilia was hinting to stop supporting him. Angrily, Robbie said, he will repay all the tuition fees to Cecilia's father in full someday. Misunderstanding, Cecilia responded sadly, "That's not what I meant," and then turned away in disappointment. Realizing his mistake, Robbie quickly stepped forward to apologize. Just then, they arrived at the fountain. Cecilia, holding a vase, was about to water the flowers, but Robbie insisted on helping and accidentally broke the handle of the vase. Although the vase was very valuable, it wasn't worth Cecilia risking her life to retrieve the broken pieces from the water. In frustration, Cecilia took off her outer garment in front of Robbie and then jumped into the fountain. She crawled up wet with fragments in her hand. Robbie stood stunned in place. The girl before him was stunningly beautiful. The two gazed at each other for a long time. Robbie was dazed before he came back to his senses and turned his face away. Cecilia quickly tidied her clothes and then hurriedly left with the vase in her hands. Seeing her beloved's back gradually disappear, Robbie, feeling lost, returned to the edge of the pond, gently brushing the rippling water with his palm, as if he could feel Cecilia's warmth. Perhaps the scene just now was too stunning. Lying in the bathtub, Robbie still couldn't calm his heart. Robbie suddenly realized that his words and actions just now might have been a bit too impulsive, so he decided to write a letter of apology. With the rhythmic ticking of the typewriter, Robbie's original apology gradually transformed into a passionate admiration for Cecilia. He immediately realized this was inappropriate, and after a self-deprecating laugh, he quickly composed himself, solemnly writing a heartfelt apology letter by hand. Moreover, to ensure everything was perfect, Robbie carefully tidied his appearance, took the letter, and hurried out. However, as he approached his destination, he suddenly felt a bit embarrassed. At this moment, Cecilia's sister Briony happened to appear, so Robbie asked her to deliver the letter to Cecilia on his behalf. As Briony took the letter and ran away gradually, Robbie suddenly remembered that he had mistakenly put an ambiguous love letter into the envelope. Although Robbie shouted desperately, it was too late. After receiving the letter, Briony did not immediately pass it to her sister, but out of curiosity and jealousy, secretly read its contents. As a result, Briony was stunned into silence after a quick glance, but this also confirmed Robbie's hypocritical nature. Perhaps the content of the letter was too ambiguous, and when Cecilia saw it, she immediately guessed there must be another letter. But no matter how she asked, Briony remained deaf to her questions. Meanwhile, to clear up the misunderstanding, Robbie decided to visit in person to apologize. The doorbell rang, and Robbie caught sight of Cecilia in her green dress, her elegance stunning him, leaving him momentarily speechless. After a long while, Robbie hesitantly said that was a misunderstanding. Robbie meant to give Cecilia a different letter. Cecilia did not respond after hearing this. Her lips curled into a smile as she turned gracefully and walked back to her room. Seeing this, Robbie followed her graceful back to the study. Cecilia's earrings quietly fell to the ground, but the two, lost in their intoxication, were unaware. Then Robbie closed the door and Cecilia turned on the desk lamp. The warm yellow light enveloped them as the lovers poured out their hearts in the study, honest about their feelings, and finally their hearts found each other. Just as they were immersed in deep affection, their cousin, who was visiting, found Briony and complained that the twin boys were pestering her, causing her wrist to swell visibly. Briony, after finishing the letter, was absent-minded, directly interrupting her cousin's confession and instead bringing up the content of the letter. Her cousin, after hearing the letter, angrily accused Robbie of sexual harassment and suggested that Briony report him to the police. Worried that the letter might be exposed and lead to Robbie's revenge, Briony begged her cousin to keep it secret. After seeing her cousin off, Briony left the room. She walked down the stairs slowly, and as she passed the study, her eyes caught sight of Cecilia's forgotten earring. She quietly slipped into the study, but unexpectedly witnessed the most unwelcome scene. Once discovered, the two hurriedly adjusted their clothes, then pretended nothing happened and left one after another. Briony kept staring at their departing figures. From then on, the seed of revenge was deeply planted in her heart and quickly sprouted. In the evening, Cecilia's family hosted a banquet for a famous wealthy merchant. During the meal, Robbie, who was a servant, appeared somewhat nervous. Cecilia, noticing this, gently hooked her finger under his hand under the table, both comforting and expressing her love. At this moment, Briony suddenly ran over hurriedly holding a letter. Cecilia mistakenly thought it was a letter written by Robbie, and she was instantly panic-stricken. Fortunately, the letter was actually left by her twin brothers who were staying at the estate. However, the worrying part was that the young brothers, longing for their mother, had secretly left to find her. Everyone was concerned about the safety of the two children and had to interrupt the dinner to search for them. The countryside castle was magnificent and splendid during the day, but at night it seemed somewhat eerie and terrifying. Briony could only cautiously proceed with the weak light of her flashlight. When she reached a dense grass patch, she unexpectedly saw a man and a woman playing a game among the grass. Startled, Briony accidentally dropped her flashlight, and the man seized the opportunity to hurriedly escape. As she approached, she realized that the woman was actually her cousin. Because they were too far apart and it was too dark, Briony couldn't see the man's face clearly and asked her cousin who he was. But her cousin tearfully explained, "I don't know," because he started by covering her eyes. After a few seconds of silent contemplation, Briony suddenly declared firmly, "That man is Robbie." Although her cousin repeatedly said she couldn't be sure, Briony still believed that the man was Robbie, reasoning that she had also seen Robbie do the same thing to her sister during the day. Due to the severity of the incident, Briony's older brother immediately took her cousin back to her room and called the police. During the police interrogation, Briony insisted that Robbie was the culprit. To strengthen her case, Briony not only presented the ambiguous love letters written by Robbie, but also handed the letter to her mother for inspection. Now, with both witnesses and evidence, everyone believed that the man was Robbie, except Cecilia, who knew very well that this was not true. Because they grew up together, she believed in Robbie's character and trusted their feelings for each other. She was certain Robbie could never do such a thing, so she voluntarily told the police, "Briony has always been prone to fantasy. Her statements cannot be fully trusted." Briony has been obsessed with literary creation since childhood. Her stories often received her mother's praise, but this also led her to dramatize real-life events. However, such an excuse clearly lacked sufficient persuasion. After the inquiry, Cecilia paced anxiously in front of the door, like a sprite wandering in the night, eagerly awaiting her lover's return. Soon after, Robbie returned with his twin brothers. But before he could clarify the situation, he was arrested by the police, with no chance to defend himself. Because Robbie's status among these distinguished people was extremely humble, and his identity was so different that no one believed him or questioned whether he was wrongfully accused. As the police car drove away, Robbie's mother stepped forward, pounding on the police vehicle, angrily accusing everyone present of being liars. Cecilia stood hopelessly at the door, truly helpless. At this moment, tears filled Briony's eyes upstairs. The ending might not be what she hoped for, but Briony's jealousy and prejudice ultimately destroyed Robbie's life. For years passed swiftly, and Robbie, still imprisoned, was conscripted into the army and was about to head to the front lines of World War II. But on the day before departure, he unexpectedly saw the figure he longed for in a restaurant. It turned out Cecilia, upon hearing that he was going to the battlefield, volunteered to become a battlefield nurse. Although the two had not seen each other for many years and missed each other terribly, the passage of time had made them silent like strangers. To seize this rare reunion, Cecilia took the initiative to hold Robbie's hand. Unexpectedly, Robbie was slightly stunned and then refused her. Because Robbie's journey would be a life-and-death ordeal, he was unsure if he could bring happiness to Cecilia, nor was he certain that the moment in the study could sustain them through a lifetime. But Cecilia's love remained unwavering, and she sincerely told Robbie, only Robbie can give her true happiness. "Please, Robbie, come back to her." Hearing this deeply emotional farewell, Robbie finally released the long-suppressed feelings and promised to return alive. On the day he left for the battlefield, Cecilia gave him a photograph of a house by the sea, with white walls and blue window frames. Cecilia looked forward to spending the rest of their lives there together. With beautiful hopes for the future, the two passionately kissed in the street, then reluctantly parted. Watching the tram carry Cecilia away slowly, Robbie couldn't help but chase after her, but could only watch her figure fade into the distance. Later, Robbie went to the battlefield in France. In 1940, the Anglo-French Allied forces with him fought against the German army on mainland France, but they were repeatedly defeated under the fierce offensive of the German mechanized units. Robbie and 2 comrades also lost contact with the main force. To ensure their safety, they hid in a local farmer's house at night and hiked to the beaches in northwest France during the day to follow the main force back to Britain. Along the way, Robbie witnessed the brutality of war firsthand, filled with despair and sadness about life. But whenever he felt he couldn't hold on any longer, he would take out the photo Cecilia sent him and look at it for a long time, because his lover's promise always gave him the courage to survive. After each viewing, Robbie would place the photo together with Cecilia's letter closest to his heart, constantly reminding himself to persevere, to stay alive, and return to marry Cecilia. After walking for what felt like a long time, Robbie and his companions finally saw hope. But after experiencing many hardships and joining the main forces, 300,000 troops still remained on the beach waiting to evacuate, and the process of transporting personnel by ships would be very lengthy. Worse still, the ships that responded to their call were repeatedly damaged by German air raids. Robbie's heart instantly sank. This was the famous Dunkirk evacuation in history. However, Robbie ultimately could not escape the cruel fate. Wounded on the battlefield, he failed to receive timely and effective medical treatment, and his health continued to deteriorate. His consciousness gradually blurred, and he even began to hallucinate. In his chaotic mind, he vaguely saw his mother bringing a basin of warm water, gently washing away the dust and fatigue of his journey. Robbie's eyes reddened, and he choked as he told his mother, Cecilia has been waiting at home for him. Robbie must go back. He promised to marry Cecilia. Then he ran out barefoot from the simple hut. His comrades, noticing his strange state, asked worriedly where he was going. Robbie, in a dazed state, said, looking for the house with white walls and blue window frames. His comrades, seeming to understand the reason, helped him rest temporarily, handed him some dry food, and comforted him. The beach squad will all be able to go home early tomorrow morning. Hearing this, Robbie was immediately overjoyed, and then asked his comrades to wake him up at 7 a.m. the next morning. Subsequently, in a pitch-black silence, he slightly trembled as he struck a match, and with the flickering light, gazed at the faded, whitened photograph. Looking at this place that filled his heart with longing, he recalled that summer, Cecilia in a green dress, standing gracefully, her green eyes full of spirit, and her words, "Come back to me," still echoed in his ears. If Robbie had not been falsely accused by Briony, perhaps he could also have a bright future. At this moment, he was trapped in a hellish situation. The adult Briony also could not escape her predicament. Briony was still unsure whether the man that night was truly Robbie. But as the years passed, she finally understood. One cannot simply define a person as a beast based on an accidental love letter, nor can one perjure themselves out of prejudice and push their beloved into the abyss. To atone for past mistakes, she resolutely gave up the opportunity to study abroad and followed Cecilia's footsteps, dedicating herself to battlefield nursing. No matter how diligent Briony worked or how tirelessly she was busy day and night, she could never find peace within her heart. Late at night, she would sit alone under the lamp, recalling the past while writing that unforgettable experience on paper. When her roommate expressed a desire to read it first, she immediately covered the book with her hand and softly said it was not yet finished. Then she sighed, perhaps this record would never be completed. The next day, Briony was busy as usual in the ward. Suddenly, a hurried ringing outside announced the arrival of wounded soldiers from the front. In a daze, Briony seemed to see Robbie's figure. But when the person turned around, Briony realized it was only her own hallucination. That evening, because she was proficient in French, Briony was assigned to care for a French wounded soldier as a final act of end-of-life care. During their conversation, Briony learned that this soldier had also been cared for by Cecilia and knew about her and Robbie's love story, even asking if they had already married. Briony replied, hopefully, they will be united in marriage soon. The man wanted to force himself to say something more, but severe headache drained his strength to speak. Briony immediately stood up, carefully loosening his bandage. However, as the gauze was removed, a nauseating stench hit her face, nearly choking her in disgust and shock. Fearing that the man would realize the severity of his injury, Briony forced herself to stay calm, softly saying, "It's okay." Her hands trembled slightly as she rebandaged the wound. But due to the severe brain injury, the man's consciousness gradually faded. In a daze, he mistakenly recognized Briony as the woman he loved, tears in his eyes, weakly asking, "Do you love me?" Briony understood that his time was near, so she unhesitatingly replied, "I love you." Hearing this, the man's face showed a relieved smile, finally closing his eyes peacefully and quietly passing away. Although Briony had long been accustomed to death, she could never get over the pain of parting life and death, and she was also worried about Robbie, who was about to go to the battlefield, fearing he might meet the same fate. As she walked heavily out of the ward, she happened to see the news playing on the screen. The news first boasted about the success of the Dunkirk evacuation, then reported on Queen Elizabeth's whereabouts. Queen Elizabeth recently visited a factory supplying chocolates to the army and personally met with the factory owner and his fiancée. However, what shocked Briony was that the factory owner was actually a wealthy businessman who had once visited her home, and his fiancée was her own assaulted cousin. Seeing this, Briony suddenly had a bold hypothesis. So, on the day of her cousin's wedding, Briony arrived at the church and quietly sat in the back, watching the couple. When she again clearly recognized the face of the wealthy businessman, a long-buried memory suddenly surfaced in her mind. It turned out that on that night 4 years ago, she did see the man with her cousin, but that man was not Robbie, but the wealthy businessman. Out of love turned to hatred, she deliberately identified Robbie. From the panicked expression her cousin showed when looking at Briony, she finally confirmed that her cousin was willing that night. It was revealed that when the wealthy businessman first arrived at Briony's house, he made eye contact with her cousin, who was also a guest. So, during the search for the runaway twins, the two took the opportunity to play games in the bushes, but were accidentally caught by Briony. To preserve her reputation, her cousin chose to go along with the mistake and falsely blamed Robbie. As a result, they pushed an innocent person into the abyss. The cruel truth also made Briony feel increasingly guilty. She had previously written countless letters begging Cecilia for forgiveness, but never received any response from her sister. Now, Briony finally gathered the courage to go to Cecilia's apartment, intending to apologize face-to-face for her youthful mistake. It turned out that since Robbie was falsely accused and imprisoned, Cecilia had left that home. Although she is now a head nurse in a hospital, her living environment is far less luxurious than before. Seeing the simple environment of the room, Briony felt even more uncomfortable. Feeling guilty, Briony said she could go to the judge to change her testimony and tell everyone that Robbie was innocent. But before she finished, Robbie, returning safely from the battlefield, came out of the bedroom with resentment. Robbie scolded Briony for her past actions, accusing her of not discerning right from wrong and causing his imprisonment. Seeing Robbie's increasing agitation, Cecilia quickly stepped forward to comfort him. After hearing the familiar come back, Robbie finally calmed down. Then, Robbie told Briony to go find her parents and tell them the whole truth. At this moment, Briony also revealed the facts, but now her cousin and the wealthy businessman are married, and her cousin cannot accuse her husband. In other words, Robbie will never be able to clear his name of the crime of assaulting a girl. After the air had been still for a long time, Briony sincerely apologized again, hoping to be forgiven by Robbie. Although she still felt angry and unjust inside, given the circumstances, Robbie had no choice. Although he could not completely clear his name legally, he was determined to let the world know the truth of the incident. So, he instructed Briony to record the entire story thoroughly and accurately. After Briony left, Robbie and Cecilia also went to the seaside in the photo. They played and frolicked together, walking along the waves. They endured hardships and finally lived the life they once desired most. The two also moved into a white house by the sea. Many years later, Briony became a renowned writer. During an interview, the reporter asked Briony to introduce her 21st novel, Atonement. Briony said this will be her last work in life, as she is suffering from cerebral arteriosclerosis and her brain function will gradually decline, along with her memory. In fact, the first draft of this novel was completed long ago, but she had never been able to find the right creative entry point. It is a semi-autobiographical novel with all characters retaining their real names. For events she did not personally experience, she verified through primary sources, such as the realities of prison life and historical events like the Dunkirk evacuation. Only the ending of Robbie and Cecilia was artistically crafted by her. Later, it was learned that after her cousin's wedding, Briony neither visited Cecilia nor had the chance to apologize to Robbie in person. It turned out that Robbie had tragically died the day before the Dunkirk evacuation. According to his comrades, Robbie, in his final moments, still tightly held a photo given by Cecilia, gazing into the distance with his eyes open, never closing them until death. Meanwhile, Cecilia drowned in a narrow tunnel during an air raid while hiding in an air raid shelter, ultimately never reuniting with Robbie. It is heartbreaking that the only true moments these lovers spent together in this life were just those brief minutes in the study and dining room. Briony said they were meant to be together. This was their destined ending. Therefore, in the novel, Briony gives them happiness. This is not weakness or avoidance, but late kindness and sincere apology. This concludes the play. Thank you, dear viewers, for your support. See you in the next episode.